Welcome to the Real Estate Investment Nomad podcast. I am your host, Nathaly Salas, an international real estate expert. Join me as we explore the thrilling world of global real estate. We'll uncover diverse international markets, backed by solid data and engaging insights. Each episode features expert guests from the hottest markets, providing you with the knowledge to invest wisely and successfully. Whether you are a local realtor aiming to go global or an investor curious about international opportunities, this is the podcast for you. Get ready to transform your approach and achieve global real estate success to become a real estate investment nomad. Hello, everybody. My name is Nathaly Salas with Unicorn Properties. And today in the Real Estate Investment Nomad podcast, we have a very special guest, Leo Pareja, which is the CEO of eXp Realty. A little bit about him. Leo began his real estate journey at 19. And by the age of 20, Leo was the number one Keller Williams agent worldwide, selling around 4,000 homes. You're the co-founder of the Washington Capital Partners and Remine, which led the fastest growing MLS platform in the industry, achieving 80% market share with 1.1 million users. Also, he ranked among the most powerful executives in real estate brokerage, named 5 times by the SP 200. And not only that, Leo co-founded the Pareja Family Foundation with his wife in 2020, which provides scholarships to disadvantaged women and minorities for tech, but helping them enter the industry without college debt. Thank you so much, Leo, for being with us. It's an honor to have you in this podcast. And yeah, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So let's start with the big elephant in the room, international real estate. Many people don't consider international real estate like a big industry yet because they focus mostly on their own markets, and US is a big market as is. What's your take on that, and how have you seen eXp taking not only the US to the next level in cloud brokerage, but also to other countries? What's the intention?
So we actually see international expansion as like a very meaningful, important green shoot for growth for us, right? So the US has about 1.6 million realtors. And if you look at the largest franchise companies, there's a ceiling to how many total agents you can have. But there's million upon millions of realtors or professionals that help people sell homes. Realtors is a US word, but real estate agents, property advisors, estate agents, if we're in the UK, that refer and practice real estate and help families buy and sell real estate. So international is super important to us. We've opened up 24 countries as an independent single brokerage model versus like a franchise where you see like the Keller Williams and the Remaxes and the family of companies owned by Anywhere. But over the next 10 years, that's a super important growth avenue for us. And I think it's super important when we also think about how the world has evolved in the sense that we are now in a global world. And the pandemic really changed the world where you can work from anywhere, truly, right? I think it was an eventuality. I think we were going to end up here anyway over time with technology, but psychologically, we completely changed the way we think of work overnight, right? It was like a super brutal 90-day process, but we all learned how to work remotely. Like I self-admittedly was one of those people that used to say, you have to be in the office. Like you can't get anything done from home. And I would have argued bitterly till the end. And now I'm probably one of its biggest proponents, right? I would say to anybody, like, if it wasn't for a virtual work from anywhere model, Glenn could have not convinced me to join him. Like, I live in Miami, Florida, in this neighborhood called Coral Gables, which I think arguably is like one of the best places on earth. And my kids can walk to school, and the ocean is 15-minute drive from my front door, and I have some of the best restaurants in the world. There was no opportunity on the planet that could have got me to move, period. And so I think the virtual world gives you this ability to attract talent, to scale somewhat as infinitely as possible, right? You become borderless. And I think global is such an important portion of that. And I can tell you, story after story, we have some of the coolest examples, right? Like there is a team in Madrid, Spain, who she lives full-time in Spain, and she holds a Florida real estate license, and she exclusively sells pre-construction condominiums to Madrileños in Spain from Madrid in Miami, Florida. right? And I can tell you time and time again, like there was a post by an agent named Kathy over the weekend where she said, I'm a global agent. I just helped somebody buy a castle in France from the US, right? So she was able to identify an agent in our system who was able to partner with her and help this family from the US buy a second home as a castle in France. Like that's just so cool to me, right? And the coolest part that's probably talked about less is it's a single company. So what that means is at time of closing, the one agent is paid in euro and the other agent's paid in dollars simultaneously. It's not like a franchise where you have to wait for the one franchisee to close it out in euro, process it, send money through corporate, then do an exchange ratio split, and then try to figure it all out. Versus like we just get this done internally. It's one transaction for us. We fulfill it quickly. And it's just a different world.
And I like that you mentioned that because when people think about international real estate, it feels like a big word and they don't grasp their head around it. They're like, no, I just want to focus on Chicago or Toronto or Miami, but they don't see that it seems too big. Has it happened that you talk to some agents and they're like, I just don't understand how I can do that? They have their own self limitations of, I just want to focus on what I know instead of that. I
Yeah,
think,
but again, like I always tell agents, you need to decide who you are, who you're wired, how you're wired, who do you want to serve, right? So for some folks, it might just not be in the realm of possibility for them because it's like might not connect with their story, their goals. Like where I think it's really cool is when I meet people who are like, and I met them internationally, where like they sold in the UK and they started vacationing in Portugal and they bought a property in Portugal and they kind of started selling in both and set up a team in Portugal. And now they're fully moving to Portugal. They're keeping their UK team and like lifestyle, they're going to be in Portugal, right? And just like that, I can tell you many stories inside of the US where someone's in multi-market and multi-state.
yeah,
So what I think when I think of entrepreneurship and small businesses, and SMB is like the acronym for small business, I actually don't think it's a bad word, right? Like I think sometimes people hear small business and they're like, oh, I want to be a big business or scale business. And the other word that's used a lot for SMB is lifestyle business. And again, I think that sometimes people don't give that the respect it needs. Because to me, a lifestyle business is a business that covers your lifestyle. And so I think that's more of the conversation about like engineering the life you want, right? What does that mean to me? It's like, look, if you want to spend half your life in another city, right? Like I live in Miami and there's a lot of people that spend time in Colombia. I'm Colombian. And so like if I were to buy a farm in Medellin where I could be there in 2 hours and I could do it for a fraction of it, what it would cost me in the Carolinas or Texas or Montana, for example. And then I have an example, a proof point, like you would be able to sell properties in Colombia and Florida, and you probably would find many other like-minded lifestyle people, right? Because what most people don't know is I think there's certain kind of reciprocating cities and countries that there's a lot of mobility and migration to, right? And so that becomes super interesting, like Portugal to Brazil, right? Like people would be shocked how many people kind of use that as an economic opportunity because you already have similarity in language. And when I was in Spain, I saw a whole lot of Colombians, right? So there's so many touch points. And again, like Dubai is just such a melting pot of up and coming entrepreneurs from all over the world that kind of feed into that. So I think the opportunity has a lot to do with what your goals are, what you want to do, right? Like I know people that sell one or two neighborhoods in one city, like even leaving the neighborhood is not part of their business planning. But look, if you have 5 or 10% market share of a big neighborhood, it's a fantastic business. That's a fantastic business that you may want to focus on building because that's what makes your lifestyle better.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, especially with the opportunity that is given to any agent within the company. And it's up to them if they want to take advantage of not. I think based on your experiences, you've been in several countries, and I've seen you guys going from country to do tours now locally because some agents that are remotely or they work remotely, sometimes they not only they focus on their own market, but then they don't know how to compare to each other's markets. So as I was traveling last year, I think I went to 10 different countries on my own just to check out, talk to the managing brokers, do my own research because I just loved it. But it wasn't because somebody made me do it. It was more like, I'm curious. How do you see, because I saw some similarities to the US in other markets and some things that were like totally different. How do you see the other certain countries relate to the US as a market and how they differ?
Yeah, so you're right. Some are very similar and some are very different. And what we've learned in our process is localizing the business and the tool set to be able to compete in the local market, right? I think one of the best case studies I remember reading in college about taking business international, where you even get just the language wrong, right? Like the Chevy Nova did not do well in Latin America because a car can Nova is not a good thing, right? And so it could be as simple as naming stuff, right? And not being aware that the translation is offensive or comical, or also just like, hey, that doesn't resonate because we don't do things that way here, right? Like in the UK, it's 100% listing sided, like buyer agency doesn't exist much at all. And so consumers are also not used to it, right? So, where do we leverage our skill set? And also, like, we've had a lot of lessons learned where the UK has been a phenomenal one where we have a phenomenal leader who held the line and said, hey, I don't want anyone who hasn't been a full-time agent for 2 years, right? So we don't have that ramp up learning period, and it's worked really well. And now we're known as a productive per person company that probably outperforms some very established UK legacy companies, right? So just having that localized knowledge. And like the other example that I'll give really well is when you've seen brands internationalize correctly, it's because they're willing to adjust the model. Like, for example, I love him or hate him, like McDonald's does a good job of adding items that are super local to the market cuisine, where if you don't, you're missing a part of the market, right? So for us, it's like, okay, do we have a comparable fill in the blank, access to local portals and seamless blah, 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 like fill in the blank. I literally would have to give you a specific country to, like in the UK, it's Rightmove, and Portugal's Idealista. And you just have to be super well versed in the tools that are important to the consumer. So you have access to the marketplace, you have access to the eyeballs, because at the end of the day, we're in the business of helping people buy and sell houses.
True. I feel like as you mentioned, but when I was in Spain, they were excited that the NAR settlement in the US was happening because they've been living this life for forever. So the buyer agents have to really position themselves. I mean, this probably happens in more than one market because in the US, we're used to having the buyer and agent agreement, the listing will pay the buyer. But now with the settlement, a lot of things have changed. But this has been the case in many countries already for many years and forever. So when they had that, they were wondering, like, because I had sent some leads to Spain and if there was a buyer, the agent will ask for a retainer or something to be able to represent them as a personal shopper to buy and search for that property, which for an American wasn't even a thing. They're like, how do you mean I'm paying ahead of time before the service starts? So that kind of broke, in my perspective, the American buyer at least in Spain as a market. But now it's kind of, we're all in the same playing field with the NAR settlement. And now you have to really work for your commission as a buyer's agent.
So I would argue that US agents always work for their commission. It's just a language and a connection as how we look at everything else.
Yeah. Okay. So I think that because of that, it has been more of I think the term itself kind of normalizes into a way that will be more of it's now we're going to different countries, so it's okay to go with your personal shopper and do that commission out of pocket, even at the beginning.
Yeah. And again, like the way I think it will play out in the United States is the sellers will still disproportionately pay for it as part of the transaction, but the ask and the commitment and the paperwork is dramatically different now for the US agent. So yeah, I think you're right though, like the socialization at scale will make a big difference to consumers in 12 months from now.
Have you seen more investors or buyers, families, as you mentioned, somebody buying a castle in France and people going abroad out of the US? As I think the trend, because after COVID, has been where do I want to live if I don't have to be in one main city for work? Have you seen a lot of that trend happening, more transactions increasing in specific countries from EXP?
So I think in general, post-COVID, we have a different view of the world. I think it happened for a couple of reasons. One, we proved we could do it. And two, in a very weird way, we were all kind of forced to internalize mortality, right? Like all of a sudden it's like, wait, I could catch this odorless thing that I can't see and it can kill me. And so I think a lot of people are like, what do I want to do before I die? And for a lot of people, it's travel and live somewhere else. And then you compound like the rapid inflation that we saw in a bunch of places, and you have folks with either a fixed income or an income that wouldn't justify or give them the lifestyle they're looking for where they currently live. I think the global footprint has been a much more interesting opportunity for folks on fixed income or folks that want to take advantage of experience some other form of life somewhere. So I don't have the statistical data, but I can tell you that I feel anecdotally and from friends and family, folks are picking up and saying, hey, with this fixed income, I can buy a comparable property that gives me the lifestyle I want, close to convenience that is important to me. And I think we're going to continue seeing that, right? Like as more and more companies allow people to work from literally wherever, as long as it's conducive to the time zones they serve, right? Like it would be realistically hard for me to spend a very long time on the other side of the world just because of the intensity we have in North America with demands and publicly traded company. But again, if you're serving a different market, like that's perfectly okay, right? And I think the really cool part is our global opportunity is very transferable, right? So I met people in the south of France who are EXP agents who used to be agents in Texas. And it was like I went on a vacation and then I went back and I wanted to stay for a month. And then I was like, wait, what do I need to do to sell real estate? Like my skill sets are actually very transferable.
Mm-hmm.
And when you actually move to another country as an expat, you can actually build a funnel who wants to work with an American, right? Like if you are the expert in fill in the blank country and city, but you're also super American and understand the nuances of what an American consumer, or fill in the blank, flip it around Portugal to the UK or wherever, that is very attractive, right? Because people like people that they're comfortable with or familiar with. And my parents owned property in Belize, and a lot of the realtors we dealt with were actually expat Americans who moved there, right? Who can kind of say, hey, I know this is how you're used to doing things in the US, but that's not how it works here. And let me explain it to you. And for some reason, fill in the blank, Latin American, European, Asian, African to whatever, I think there's an almost instant trust level where you can say, well, yeah, you just spoke to me in the way that we do it. And so as you walk me through as an expert and show me how to do it here, there's a lot of rapport that takes place. So look, the opportunities are boundless in the sense of obviously when we get to a local market, we want to find some local established players with super strong reputation that need to become our face in our leadership. But then there's also like the expat opportunity of cross-pollination and opportunities for everybody.
Yeah, I feel like I saw a lot of that in the last conference we went to in Lisbon, because it's like a nice playground of people with the same mindset. Like I'm curious to learn more about different countries in different, cultures, but also the real estate. How does the real estate work over there where you are? And a lot of the communication and the network happened that way because I feel like the real estate transaction is fairly similar for the most part and only varies by the country that they're in, maybe the legality and things like that. I saw many realtors just spending more time in Spain, more time, just go and spend a few months in Portugal just to learn. And they're from Philadelphia or they're from North Carolina, just because they want to learn more. And they're able to do this with EXP because the seamless transactions, you can send that as a referral if you're there and just getting, like you said, clients from that they look and sound like you. And has been like an option because the nomad realtor or the remote work as a realtor didn't exist before up until now.
100%. I agree.
So I like that too. And I feel like that's how this podcast was inspired because a lot of people were like, what do you mean international real estate? For real estate, you have to be in one place and to help your clients. Otherwise, how do you sell? And this has been like the trend. And that's why we were thinking to just focus on this more because a lot of realtors have the tools already, even with our network, but they don't know how to use it. Or people that are looking from the outside in, they're like, how do you do it? I'm curious because what do you mean I get paid in my country, in my currency, so I can declare my taxes where I am? And I think EXP has been able to do that seamlessly, mostly because what you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, no, and it's a unique, like no one's done anything close to what we've done. And I think most people say, well, what are you talking about? Remax and Keller Williams are bigger internationally, but like those are all franchises, right? So each local operator is an independent business owner that relies on the kind of the brand only, but we are one company, right? Like everybody is an employee of ours.
Perfect. And a few questions on the challenges. As you have been able to see other realtors and other teams abroad, what do you think is the main challenge for specific countries? I'm sure it's going to be different by country, but like, let's say the top 3 challenges besides not having an MLS to start with. Many countries don't have one. So the search there is slightly more manual. Although some countries are trying to get more technology out there, still not as mainstream as going to the Zillows of the world and looking for a property at a certain price range?
Yeah, so again, I think the magic, which again we're still learning and refining constantly, is understanding the ecosystem, right? So I'll like everyone wants to know, how do we start a country, right? So first of all, we need to understand what the total addressable market is from an agent count and transaction count, right? Because our model is a capped model, right? Like, there's some beautiful islands in the Caribbean with very high price points, but there's like literally 100 people who dominate the sales, and the frequency and the number of transactions is too low. We're just, as a capped model, doesn't make sense for us, right?
Mhm.
Like the volume and commissions are interesting, but we limit what we participate in the transaction. So there might just not be enough volume for us to go to certain countries, which is always a super, super interesting math problem. And then once we get there is understanding the ecosystem. So who are the players? Who do we need to attract over either, whether it's operationally or regionally or leadership wise or forward facing wise, where we can become a serious player very quickly. And then making sure that our model adapts correctly. So I'm very clear that we don't need to be all things to all people, right? Like we're only going to get X percentage of the total real estate practitioners, and that's perfectly okay. And we don't need to be all things to all people. And so we need to make the decision like, hey, is this interesting enough for us to spend time, energy, and money and resources? And if it is, let's do the best job we can to localize it, right? Because I think we're just like simple words. Like in some countries, we don't use realty. Like it's not a word that resonates. So we have to call it the right thing and make sure we're not calling them real estate agents if they're estate agents, right? Like if there's nuances to each market that I think when some American companies show up, they skip the details and it's clunky and it feels like a foreign invader versus someone who is taking the time to learn the local nuances and the local culture and the local customs on how to operate in that segment of the business.
And based on what you said, when the franchise model versus the more cohesive one company model, I feel like it has been a very easy process for us to send and receive leads from many places within the world where we are. Because when I was chatting with some of my peers and friends that are in different franchises, when they don't even send or care about any referrals because they're like, I just don't know how much I'm gonna get paid. So I don't even know if it's even worth the time to invest to send a lead somewhere else, and I don't even know who am I sending to. I think from my perspective, having that new portal that we have, which now with one click you find a directory, the realtor you want to find in the city that you want to find them, and you can call them directly. You don't have to go through their boss or who's their, the franchise owner and the managing of that franchise. And then you just don't know at the agent level. I feel like you just don't know how much is the commission, and people just they skip it. They're like, it's too much work. I don't want to do it in the franchise model. So I think that has been like a lot of the benefits of being in this model of like, you pick up the phone call and you call directly to the agent and be like, hey, do you want to work on this deal with me? And it's just you and I. And then, of course, we get paid by the company. And that has been very helpful.
Yeah, no, and that's like what we're constantly focused on to make sure it works and makes sense. And I promise you, we won't get it right the first time, and we will learn and adapt and switch. And like that tool was something we rolled out internally in the US first. We scaled it, we tested it out, we made sure that there was all the right measures working inside of it, and then we were able to thankfully roll it out internationally, which is super important to us.
Also, we cannot see the future, but what are the future trends that you see? Like in the next 5 to 10 years in the real estate space, not only in the US, but globally?
Yeah, so one thing I've noticed for 23 years that I've been in the business is the speeding up of everything, right? And I think that's a direct correlation to technology, right? So I've been in real estate long enough where I used to fax contracts. And in order to see a property, it took a couple days back and forth on a landline. And then I scheduled the appointment. Then I wrote hard and pressed hard because it was a yellow copy, and we used to tear them off. And then the internet happened, right? Like I had the internet in high school and college, but it was really kind of rare, and it really didn't become until high-speed internet. And then all of a sudden I could look at listings from my house. That was a big difference. I didn't have to go to the office anymore. And then the dramatic shift was when this thing came out, right? Because this gave me the internet in my pocket everywhere.
Yeah.
And it became 10 times more powerful. And once that happened, you saw teams in the US go from 200 transactions to like 1,000 transactions over a 10-year period, right?
Mhm.
And the interesting part is they're doing it with the same number of homes. Like every year, depending on what happens in the global markets and the economy, we sell about the same number of homes. And they go up and down based on interest rates. So some years are more homes because the interest rates are low, and when the interest rates are high, as well as kind of general instability, then that's what happens. And so it's a massive difference in the world, because at that point, it really depends as to how fast you can work with customers, how many leads you can convert. And I think that the advent of all the technology we're seeing explode, like in AI and chat GPT and large language models. And what I say to people is the agents that use AI put the ones that don't out of business, or better said, the agents that leverage technology put the ones that don't out of business. So I fully expect to continue to see the trend I've seen for the last 2 decades.
Awesome. And thanks for sharing that, because I feel like a lot of realtors, if they hear this information and they can see how seamless it can be a referral and how you can make an extra few $1,000s without even traveling to the country.
Yeah, no, I was over the tech group who built that. And to me, it was like, I obsess with giving agents time back, right? One of two things. One is I want to give you dollar productive time back, right? So if you're doing something, by the way, to fill out a referral form prior to the tool, on average, because I actually looked it up, like I measured, it was probably like 20 to 30 minutes. And now it's 20 to 30 seconds, right? That becomes, like you said, way more interesting in doing more of that, especially if you then get a $2,000 or $4,000 or $10,000 check back. You're like, wait, that was not a lot of work for that level of opportunity. And again, if I tell, and that was domestically 20 or 30 minutes, I would assume that internationally would take a lot longer than that, right?
I think, yeah, it
Versus
was a PDF and now it's the portal.
now we automated it, we auto-populate, we get signatures all magically, right? Not magically, there's Ruby on Rails and a whole bunch of technology that I'm aware of behind it, but like to you as a user and as experience, it's pretty seamless. And so like that's been happening since the dawn of man, right? It's when we created the wheel and fire and rocks and stones and roofs and clothes and antibiotics and keep going. That always continues to happen.
I think that what you mentioned, that giving agents time back is super important, because we're all running around with the transaction part, with the marketing side, and then that referral. So then simplifying the process has been able to help all the agents. Now we talk about the portals. We're super excited, first of all. Thanks for rolling it out. And I think it came out in June this year. And has that increased a lot of the volume on transactions as of now? Or because before, as you mentioned, it took maybe 30 minutes just because you had to still find the person who you're going to send it to, the email, the managing broker. And now it's more like you find the person and everything is automatic.
Oh, absolutely. I always say that I think people overcomplicate things that they don't need to complicate, right? Like I think people choose products and services, and I don't think when you're put yourself in the entrepreneur side or the business owner side, you give yourself enough credit as a consumer, right? Like I think you should always ask yourself, what do I want? How do I want to be approached? How do I want to be served? And use yourself as I call it a sample size of one, right? Perfect example. Like I don't think I've opened my mail outside of in front of a trash can for 10 years. I avoid any and all phone numbers I don't recognize. Right. But I bought a lot of stuff from Instagram that gave me a well-timed message. Right. And so, like, and again, I'm not saying that's for everybody. I'm a 42-year-old male that's married that makes X dollars. And like, I fit a certain demographic, right? Where, again, who's my target consumer? Is it a retiree in the specific part of the world? That consumer has a different behavior profile than I do. And so I always start with like myself, like, would I spend money on this? How would I experience that? So for me, like they're the things that I don't like. I'm like, I hate calling somewhere and being on hold and talking to a robot, or I have to click 10 times to talk to a human, right? So like I make sure like none of that exists in our business, because I think, again, people overcomplicate things. The goal of a business is to remove friction from the experience. That's why I'm talking to you on my Apple laptop and my iPhone is sitting right here and my AirPods are right here and my Apple Watch are right here. Not because I specifically like Steve Jobs or Tim Cook a lot. It's they make the frictionless experience of having my text messages go from there to there. It's the fact that if I log in when the new one comes out in 3 weeks, I'll buy one because I just scan that little thing and it all appears right there. My passwords work and my face recognition works and my credit cards are on there, right? So I always tell people to approach their business like that. What about your business has a lot of friction? Where can you like predict what's going to happen next? Right? Like if I was working with Americans coming over to a different country, I'd be like, oh, by the way, here's the explanation for this engagement letter. Like, I understand this doesn't exist in your country, or now it does. This is how homes are sold in this country. And all of those small nuances that make a big difference.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I like the example of the seamless platform that you have everything accessible without spending so much time on it. That's awesome. What would you, my last question would be like, what would you advise, or what kind of a point, I think for me is like, keep your mind open, but for you, an advice for the aspiring global realtors, what would be something that if they're curious about expanding and they're probably in a different brokerage, they don't have the opportunity to do that, what would be kind of like the 3 steps that they need to follow, or what kind of quick advice you can give them like to actually just do it?
So again, I would first identify what your goals are, right? Like I always like to start with the end in mind, right? Like, first of all, it's perfectly okay to like try and dabble, but that's not a business model. So like a really good example of that is statistically, I think people visit another city 5 times before they either buy a second home or actually even move. Like if you're curious, I'd say go spend your vacation time there. Just learn, act as a consumer, right? Experience stuff and kind of gain knowledge and even pay for education, right? So a perfect example, when I was in production, let's say I wanted to learn a new niche or discipline, I would kind of find the best person I could in the country and say, hey, what would it cost me to buy a day of your time? And there's a real example where I found the best probate agent I could in the country, someone who specialized on working with probate attorneys. And I think he charged me $7,500 for the day. And I spent the whole day with him. I listened to all his calls. He gave me all his scripts, all his process, like the do's and don'ts. And I got home and said, I absolutely never want to do this. This is not who I am. And again, not right or wrong, no judgment. It's purely like, this is highly, like I learned a lot. Like these are highly emotional conversations that are highly technical. And that's not my jam. I ended up building and obsessing with multi-transactional customers that were corporate based. I speak finance. I always have. It came easy to me. And so like loss severity, acquisition costs, return on investment, I can do some stuff in Excel. That's not for everybody either, right? There's a lot of people that kind of hear what I say and like, oh, like no, that's not me. So I encourage people to because I am shocked by the amount of people who said, okay, I'm going to try social media, and they just wing it and spend years, months, tens of thousands of dollars trying stuff. When again, there are a lot of BS out there, but like if you can probably find someone who's actually legitimate. My advice is don't find a coach, find someone who's a practitioner and be like, hey,
Yes.
what will it cost me to come hang out with you for a day? And oh, by the way, you know what most of the time when I made that phone call was? Nothing. What are you an expert at? And teach me what you do. That's actually what most people said to me. There was a couple who were like, no, I know my time and this is a day. And I said, cool, I'll pay it. And I will tell you that it actually turned out to be some of the best money I ever spent. It was almost every single time I was like, I don't want to do that.
It's a quick learn to just be like rule things in and out to
I'm extremely rapid in how I think and like yes or no. Like to me, decision is the worst decision.
I like that. Quick decisions, learn fast or fail fast, or just take the direction and just keep going with it. Awesome. Love it. My last request will be, if you had to nominate somebody for this podcast, do you have anybody in mind that you will suggest that should be here sharing the knowledge on international real estate, whatever country that is? Who would that be?
I would definitely tell you to talk to Felix Bravo. He's our VP of Global Growth, and he's doing a phenomenal job. And I think he's got a lot of insight.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Leo. It's been a pleasure talking to you. We learned so much, and the whole main purpose of this podcast is to chat with people in the space that are actually doing the work and have the experience and can share those little nuggets with the rest of the world. So
awesome. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you for joining us on the Real Estate Investment Nomad podcast. I hope today's episode has inspired you to explore new horizons in global real estate. Remember, the world is full of opportunities waiting to be discovered. And with the right insights, you can turn those opportunities into successful investments. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your feedback helps us bring you the best content possible. Don't forget to follow us in social media for more resources and updates. Until next time, my friends, this is Nathaly Salas, encouraging you to think big, invest globally, and transform your real estate journey. Safe travels and happy investing.